Hello everybody, it's Michael Hollands once again for Sound of the Movies. Today I have the pleasure to be joined by Anthony Willis. On today's episode, we will talk extensively about his musical career and of course, we will discuss his music for How to Train Your Dragon Homecoming, the holiday special, which aired on NBC on December 3rd. Welcome Anthony.
Thank you so much, Michael. Pleasure to be here and to talk to you.
It's great to have you. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule for me. And Anthony, at first, I would like to know what sparked your interest in films and film scoring back then.
Oh gosh, that's a great one. So I started doing music when I was pretty young. I was actually a chorister, like a couple of the really amazing film composers who've been working for a long time. I was lucky to have a training as a chorister when I was about 9 years old. And in England, there's a sort of strong cathedral choir tradition, and I think just the intensity of music making, there just really kind of instilled, me with a desire to write my own music. And then, early on, I was just very inspired by, a lot of the scores I was hearing in the theatre. I don't think I was really aware of film music until I really remember like James Horner's Titanic score sort of making a big impression on me, and Hans Zimmer's Lion King score. I just love the kind of majesty of it, and actually a lot of the amazing thing about the Lion King is it's very close. It really draws into a sort of cathedral choir sound. That amazing scene with Mufasa's death. It's sort of very close to Mozart and Elgar, and so it was a sort of transition from what the kind of music I've been singing and loving into actually hearing it in a modern contemporary context. And yeah, so I got interested from there and started to write my own music when I was about 13, having come out of this intensive core training. And I say write my own music, it obviously wasn't any good, but I just sort of started to figure out my way around the orchestra, and wrote some pieces for piano and orchestra, which was my main instrument. And that eventually led me to studying music, composition at Bristol and piano performance, and eventually out here to LA.
Besides film music, what other types of music are you most attracted to?
A lot of film composers would say that they don't. A lot of my friends would go, "Oh no, I really like funk, or I really like hip hop, or I really like these kind of a very specific thing," and they'll very much sort of meticulously digest that kind of music. I think most film composers would say that they're really attracted to anything that's done with a lot of grace and a lot of interest, and something that's a bit different. So really, I'm open to liking anything. It's just if it shows that kind of some kind of special imagination that just goes, oh wow, I haven't heard that before, but it just sort of it's not so off the road that it makes you question the actual artistry of it, but actually it just speaks to you because it's a little bit different.
Anthony, if I'm not mistaken, as of 2010, you had started working in this field, either contributing additional music or writing as the lead composer. And please tell me a bit about your experience back then and how you perceived the business when you were starting out.
That's a great question. I think it's changed a lot, even in the time I've been operating. Obviously, the growth of social media has changed things, a lot. Like most composers didn't when I moved to LA in 2010, didn't really even have serious websites. Certainly didn't have Facebook pages, and really were operating under word of mouth and the traditional avenues. And if you went to go and work for those composers, you would you definitely sort of be in the cave and just get your head down and do your best. And so things have certainly moved on a lot since that time. I think equally the technology's changed a lot. I think the demands on assistants when I was starting out were higher just because the gear wasn't nearly as affordable. So, these days composers can have home studios and they'll keep their main presentation studios. I mean, composers at the top of the game. I mean, a lot of composers are remote. And they'll be able to operate on a different rig, and therefore the assistant has access to the rig, in daylight hours. And, that's really changed those jobs a lot. But specifically for me, I was an assistant. Well, really, when I moved here, I did the USC film scoring program, which was really great. I mean, I know there's a lot of alumni, Chris Beck, Teddy Shapiro, Marco Beltrami. There's many really talented composers, Jake Monaco, Austin Wintry, Leo Birenberg, who was in my year. There's a lot of composers who've come from that program, and it's now a master's, but it's basically a sort of 9-month crash course in and trying to prepare you for the business. And it's certainly not a contained academic environment. You've got short film deadlines colliding with your big orchestral deadlines, and it's just sort of 9 months of collisions, one after the other. But it certainly, for me, I think it was great because it was the first time I got to work with really good musicians. The session players here in LA that would be playing on the films I'm working on now. And so it was really nice to start a relationship with them, which is, I think, the big reason that they like to support the students and they do these sessions. But also, it's the first time you're hearing what you've written without any, any sort of excuses, I suppose. It's always growing up, as a young composer, getting your work performed. I mean, as any composer, to get your work performed is a huge undertaking, especially for orchestral music. And the performances I had of my work, it was, they'd had no rehearsal time, and not everybody was there in the orchestra till the last performance, and there were all sorts of things. But also the reality is that what I was writing wasn't really that good yet. So, but you never quite knew, and you never got to learn those lessons. Because if you show up at a scoring stage in LA with a piece that's not well written, you'll find out pretty quick. And you'll learn that lesson. Hopefully you'll learn that lesson of, oh my God, I really thought this was going to work great, but it sucks. Luckily I didn't have too many of those moments at USC, more the actual magic of something that you've been imagining coming alive, and that's a wonderful feeling. And I think that all composers need to experience that to sort of arm them against the trials of their careers ahead, because that you can't beat that feeling, and I think that's why we all do it. So that for me was a really valuable aspect of USC. Obviously along with just the kind of rhythm of having to generate music for the first time in a fairly large quantity. I mean, I think now if I did USC, I'd find it obviously a lot easier because I've been down those avenues so many times. But it was, for anybody sort of wanting to get into the business, it is a really good program. It's a really, it's not really long enough to completely reinvent the wheel. And obviously people come to that program with very different levels of experience. Some have really been writing a lot. Some have some have really got their sort of technology organized, and they've got all their libraries, and they've got everything together in that respect. So everybody comes to it with different strengths, but it's a very good program. And one of the reasons it's very good is it has a very strong, as I mentioned, a very strong alumni presence, but also, contact with, seminars with visiting teachers. And we had a really good seminar with Harry Gregson-Williams. I don't know if Harry still does the occasional seminar there. I suppose it depends how busy he is, but he was the only person in all our training that actually got us to explore the one thing that I do most of all, which is theme and variation within a movie. So he gave us one cue from Shrek, which was Shrek Forever After, which was a really cool thing to do. Obviously, to like, as a young composer, getting to actually explore that amazing DreamWorks animation sound that he was a big part of developing. And then the second, he gave us two cues from this movie, 12. And, he was like, write a theme in this scene and develop it in another, which seems such a basic concept of film scoring, but really there just wasn't time in the program to get into that in a lot of depth. You end up writing a lot of ideas at USC, but you don't actually have the time to develop them endlessly. I mean, that's not completely fair. Of course, there are other things in the film, but in the program that allow you to do that. But this was a really, really, really cool seminar, and I'd heard about Harry, as I mentioned before. He had a similar core background to me, and I knew his music and really loved his Shrek and Narnia scores, and I was like, God, if I can't, rise to the occasion here, then I'm not really up to this. And so, I probably stayed up for 3 days doing some sort of fairly okay cues, but good enough that they got his attention. And so he invited me to intern with him as a result of that workshop. And we sort of, kept he'd set me assignments like making little piano arrangements of his music and just things to sort of vet me. And then I remember doing, like, I think the first thing I did was making some guitar charts for George Deering. George Deering, who is a legendary session guitarist in LA. He plays on just about every single movie under the sun, and Harry was scoring Cowboys and Aliens, and so I helped with things like that, and it was a really wonderful way to start seeing the business. And then at about the end of my year, he'd sort of said, "Oh, you should come on," but he then got offered to do a teaching sabbatical, so he went back to England.
Yeah,
found myself going to work at Remote, and I worked for a composer called Heitor Pereira, who's a wonderful guitar player, among other things, and obviously has now built his career very much as a family movie composer. And we worked on Despicable Me 2, Despicable Me Ride, Smurfs 2, and that was, I was sort of his right hand. I learned a lot about every aspect of the business. So it was a very valuable time.
Speaking of Harry Gregson-Williams, you mentioned Cowboys and Aliens, and Harry is known as a fairly fast worker. I mean, I've heard that a couple of times, that he works at a pretty awesome speed, so to speak. And when you worked with him on this picture, how did you experience working with him, and how did you experience his take on film scoring? Did this in some way enable you to write more quickly yourself? How did this happen back then on this film?
Yeah, I think, on Cowboys and Aliens, I was very much behind the scenes. I was really a fly on the wall guest in the times that I did, as I said, these guitar sessions with George Deering, and later I got to be a fly on the wall at the scoring sessions. And I wasn't super involved in that project. I was still in school.
Yeah.
But what I did see was somebody who really has their art down in terms of, how they like to do things. And yes, now he's a fantastically fast worker and, really knows what he likes. And later on in my career, I did assist him a little bit on The Martian. Yeah, he's such a that was, Ridley Scott is notoriously tough filmmaker to work with, and seeing Harry in that situation was really amazing. He's loved and as a film composer, and for a very good reason. No doubt he at that younger age in my career, when I was finishing USC, I saw him as somebody, wow, like that's somebody who really knows what they're doing, if I'm ever lucky enough to be involved, in the kind of productions he is, then I'm doing the right thing. I actually I had dinner the other night at the Sushi in Venice, which I don't know if you've ever been there, but it's right below Wavecrest Music, which used to be Harry's studio at that time. And after the release of Dragon Homecoming, I thought to myself, wow, that's it was an interesting kind of moment of perspective on my life. At the time I was at USC, not really ever knowing if I'd have a career, and if I'd get to assist anybody. And it's funny how places in our lives, they don't really change, but our own perspectives do a lot, depending on what we've experienced. And so that was an interesting one. But no, I mean, really, I never worked a great deal with Harry, and I probably would have more if I hadn't met John, who, really changed my life. And, obviously I've worked with pretty extensively and learned a huge amount from. And obviously that's really what's led me to be the composer I am, and certainly to have scored Dragon Homecoming.
John Powell, you had worked with him on, I think, Rio 2, How to Train Your Dragon Part 2 and 3, Pan, and Solo, A Star Wars Story, just to name a few. And some people may get confused by the term additional arrangements or additional music. May I ask you to shed some light into this? Can you elaborate on your involvement with, with the John Powell scores, how you interact with him, how you work with him? Do you pick up a cue? Do you do different arrangements, or have you also written some material of your own? Can you disclose that? Can you elaborate on that?
I think what I'd say about that is that John is phenomenally generous in his process, and as somebody who's scored many films and done things many times, he is eminently capable of doing more. Capable isn't even the right word for it, but he could certainly write every single note in every cue in the movie. But I think, like any major leader in a field, whether it's a restaurant or whatever it is, there's a role to be had in a hierarchy. And I think, John, the magic of John's scores lie in his tunes, which he works very hard on. And, those are what, sew a through line through the score emotionally, and, create the narrative in the score. And then, beyond that, John's just been very generous with me in allowing me to help with arrangements and things like that, which, I think with the volume of music in a movie, it does enable the head of the department to sort of maintain a perspective. So you get very zoomed in on a particular cue, and and some of the deadlines and the need to present demos, and just means that it's beneficial to have a team around you. But really, I've just sort of seen it as a privilege to actually be a part of his process, working on movies that I'd never, and scenes that I'd never have a chance of getting on my own at that younger stage of my career, and learning how to do it and building confidence in doing it. But no, I can't really say enough wonderful things about him, because he really has been incredibly generous.
Yeah, I'm sure he has been, and I bet. And of course, I can imagine it's a great learning experience working with an accomplished composer, either as an assistant or as an additional arranger, just to get a taste of the business and learning the ropes, so to speak, interacting with filmmakers and learning how to write a cue and watching them write for a specific scene. So I think there's a lot to learn, and I'm pretty sure that a composer such as John Powell can give you an enormous amount of insight into the business.
Oh yeah, I mean, in a way that few can. I mean, I think that obviously the business is changing under all of our feet, before we can really move forward anywhere. But yeah, no, I mean, so what it was to be a young composer when John had just started here, and what it is to be there now couldn't really be more different. Well, I'm sure in 10 years it will be, but there are certain truths about story and musical impact, and that John has sort of accrued throughout his own study and hard work that are timeless. And I count myself very fortunate to be somebody that's been a fly on the wall to that.
I mean, when John Powell started out in the film industry, I think his first score was Face Off in 96 or 97. So that was a long time ago, and many things I'm sure have changed, and they will continue to change within the next 5 or even 10 years. So yeah, I think it has become a difficult business. There's always progress, there's no stagnation, and I wonder what the future up and coming talents will think of this business when they will start out. So I guess it doesn't get any easier. And which advice, so to speak, would you give to an up and coming composer today?
I mean, I would definitely recommend. I think there's a lot of pressure because of social media and all these things to, age 20 or age 22, depending on what kind of education you're doing, come out of school and be like, okay, I'm an artist, and I'm ready, and I'm gonna basically be my own boss and be my own businessman. And I'd certainly recommend, you don't have to be that age 20. Obviously, it's interesting because in the music business in general, there are a lot of young artists unrelated to film, or in fact, that then want to get into film after they've built a following. So I think that's where maybe that expectation comes from. But like any company, I mean, whether it's a law firm or a corporate finance firm or any kind of, or a big agency, I mean, that's a lot of pressure you're putting on yourself at a young age to operate in a market of people that have been doing it for a long time. Now, whether actually ultimately because of access to technology and the accessibility of technology, that really it's going to be possible for composers to come out of college and they're talented enough and they're just like, hey, I can write some pretty cool music, and why pay somebody 15, 20 years older as much as you are? I'll do it for you. I mean, I suppose then it comes down to relationships, but there's writing cool music, and then there's actually being able to prescribe without prejudice what's really best for the film or TV show or game you're doing. And when you're in a period of your own discovery, I think it's hard to keep perspective of that. You go, well, I want to write the coolest tune and the most awesome piece, and some things don't actually require that. And I think it takes experience to know, when to pull out the stops. And so, I would, sorry, I was a bit long-winded, but I would say that I would encourage composers to do an additional music or assistantship training, and give yourself the opportunity to grow and become the best version of yourself you can become, while firing your gun off a much bigger shoulder. And even if you're in a situation where you can't necessarily write, I mean, not all composers have the volume of work or the actual inclination to have additional writers. But if you can be a score coordinator, you're still in a position of trust that you can learn and soak up a huge amount of knowledge. So I'd certainly recommend that, and of course build relationships, meet studio music departments, meet orchestra contractors, meet musicians. All of these things, you're getting you get a shortcut or a slipstream to the best people in the business who are operating. And so I think that's what I'd say. I mean, if you can, obviously, you shouldn't suppress the urge to write and work on your own music and your own craft and absorb everything, well, to actually manifest everything you've been absorbing in your own work. But I think it's a high expectation to put on yourself to be, the CEO of your business in your early 20s.
Anthony, now I would love to talk about How to Train Your Dragon Homecoming, the holiday special, which aired on NBC on December 3rd, as I mentioned in my introduction. And as you had already contributed music to the previous films, it must have been a great opportunity for you to write the score for this holiday special. And please tell me a bit about how this assignment came about.
Like everybody who saw How to Train Your Dragon 1, which I did actually just before I moved to LA, and I had sort of a hard time, not hard time, but I was sort of explaining to some of my friends why I was moving to LA, why couldn't I do what I wanted to do in London, what exactly it was that I wanted to do. And, I happened to go and see that movie, and I thought, wow, that is exactly what I want to do. And I know that I'm not alone in that experience. Because John's score really was so amazing, and obviously he'd been very established for a long time, and he'd been writing scores of very, very similar caliber for a long time as well. But something about that synthesis of Celtic music and Vikings and dragons and soaring, heart on your sleeve emotion, married to the film, just really captured all of our imaginations and hearts. And so that was the kind of prelude to my actually moving here. But as fate would have it, I did meet John shortly before he was scoring the second film, and just found myself in the very fortunate position of assisting him on that. And and then of course we did The Hidden World, and through those two movies I really sort of think that I found myself as a composer, and I think he saw that too. And so when this holiday special was mentioned, he recommended me for it, and I'd sort of thought my journey in Dragons was finished after The Hidden World, but I feel very lucky to have had this last foray into this world. So that's how essentially I came to be scoring it.
Those films, of course, are very family oriented, and I myself enjoy those greatly. Do you find it quote unquote easy working on this kind of a movie or these films? As you know, they appeal to a certain younger target audience, or do you feel it is actually more difficult working on those versus live action pictures? Do you write those from a different perspective?
Yeah, I mean the world that John created for Dragons very much appeals to my loves as a composer, and so working in that kind of tone emotionally and also in terms of the actual instrumentation and the harmony of it is something that is a real joy. Like versus maybe other projects that are quite hard to work on just because of the subject matter is quite intense, and you really have to sort of push yourself to to really support those with some quite frightening music. So yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that working on something like Dragons is like it's really kind of top of the wish list. I think for a lot of composers, but then equally, everybody has different personalities, and there are people that are so fantastically inventive in more extreme genres and live action genres, and in terms of how difficult it is, I suppose it is difficult music in that what John wrote is very good, and so you're trying to honor that and write something that's worthy of that world. Obviously, then again, in the case of Dragons, I mean, John has really established the tone and the sound and the feeling of the franchise, and obviously a huge number of the beloved themes. So from that point of view, you're walking into a situation where a lot of the hard work that a composer has on a project has actually been done for you. So, when you get into the nitty gritty of arranging, animation, orchestral arranging, especially in homage to John Powell, is difficult because colors are moving very quickly. There's a lot of information. So yes, it's difficult, but it's also, I mean, I had a real gift of walking into a world that's already very much loved.
The film is about 25 minutes long, and the album also features about the same amount of music. Did almost every cue you wrote make it into the final version? Could you elaborate on that?
It did, yeah, it did. No, we put. I think the album is almost chronological. A couple of the cues are a bit short, so I put them together in a slightly out of order way. But it's I'd say 95% completely as you'd experience it in terms of the chronology of the movie, and then there's also the additional soundtrack suite, which is really just a reprisal of some of the the newer, mainly focusing on the newer themes I wrote for the story, which are the memory theme and the themes for the night lights.
Right. And your album has been released digitally, and it is available now on most platforms. And the film was aired on NBC on December 3rd. And for those who missed it, unfortunately, and will there be another broadcast? Can fans experience it once more, or has it been a one-time thing on NBC?
It's on Hulu, actually.
Hulu, okay.
It's on Hulu, and then of course there are a number of international premieres on various channels. I've not got the latest list for that, but yeah, there's it's going to be. I think it's showing in England on Christmas Day, which I'm very excited about.
Great. I'm sure many fans have been wondering as to when they will get to see it again, or if they will get to see it again. And I'm sure many didn't know that it will air again, or even on a streaming service such as Hulu. So thank you very much for sharing this with our audience. And what can fans of the original Dragon films look forward to on this holiday special?
Well, in the broader sense, my approach to scoring it was very similar to, how I've witnessed John score some of the sequels, which is, honoring the original themes he wrote for Dragon 1, and then actually introducing some new themes for the new characters and the new thematic aspects of the story. I remember on Dragon 2 being a bit surprised that he had all these new themes. I was going, well, but surely the fans just want the existing themes. And what I learned was that if a theme is attached to a concept in the first film, such as innocence and childhood, and which is so beautifully done, and then you've got a second movie that explores a different emotional language. If you apply those themes to that, you're actually diluting the, the power that they had in the first movie. And actually, I mean, he just did such a beautiful job in both How to Train Your Dragon 2 and How to Train Your Dragon Hidden World of introducing new themes. And then also, having appropriate callbacks to the originals where appropriate. For example, in Dragon 2, there was a whole overture of themes from Dragon 1 for the dragon racing scene. I.e., the life hasn't really changed a great deal, although they've all grown older. That it's all, it was a very elegant way of sort of bringing us back into that world. But then, of course, as new ideas, the exposition of new ideas come up, new themes are introduced. So Homecoming is very similar. It's obviously a lot shorter, as you said. It's only 25 minutes, but it's very much in that spirit. So there's a new theme for memory, which is, there's a very nostalgic aspect to this. For anyone who's seen The Hidden World would understand, there's a very nostalgic aspect. So reflecting on the past and honoring the past. And then more specifically, and then obviously the Nightlights I mentioned, and there's sort of mischief for kids, and there's a mischief sort of Snoggletog theme which gets developed in the third act, which you will see what happens when you watch it. But more specifically, the whole premise of this special is that they revisit, or the retelling of what happened in Dragon 1. And so there's a lot of very specific references to that score, but like the pageant that they put on for the kids to explain what happened, there's some moments of artistic license. So where they, the history is slightly diverted. So I had a lot of fun kind of referencing those things. And, I'm really hoping that some of the more studious Dragon fans will really dig in to see what I did there with those themes.
You had recorded the score at Abbey Road Studios this year, and by the time you had written the music, you also at some point start preparing the sessions, so to speak. And could you please explain the process to our audience from mock-up to the final recording, so to speak?
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually we did it at Air, in fact, but no, I mean, both absolutely beautiful places to record. I think Dragon 1 was a hybrid. I think it was mainly Air. Dragon 2 was definitely a hybrid, and then The Hidden World was all done at Abbey Road. So Air is nonetheless still very much, I think, one of the birthplaces of the Dragon music. So it was really cool to be able to record the strings and woodwinds over there. And I mean, there were just some really stunning performances, especially from Karen Jones, who is the most marvelous alto flute and piccolo player. Well, beautiful flautist. And I think that, those are the instruments I leaned on very much for the new themes. So I'm so delighted to work with her. As far as the actual recording goes, well, the process, yeah, I mean, as I've learned from John, we make very, very specific demos. And actually, I've also learned from Henry Jackman, who's really specific with his orchestration. I mean, he leaves almost nothing to the orchestrator's control. And I think it's cool for fans to know that. I mean, obviously, everybody needs their teams, and those teams are like hugely valuable. But I think that sometimes in the mythology of film music, especially with Hans, who also has is a big collaborator and works with a lot of musicians, I think that there's a narrative that these big composers don't actually aren't capable of doing certain things, or don't really take full ownership. But I can absolutely say that what I've learned from the people that I work with is that they 100% do. And John and Henry in particular are very specific about what they want from the orchestration. And so, I mean, I think that's also something that's been made possible by how good sample libraries have got, i.e. the process of creating a demo and the process of creating, a demo that sounds really good, that's going to impress a director. and the process of actually creating a really good arrangement have become much closer together. Whereas traditionally in the past, it's been very hard to do a really bona fide, well orchestrated arrangement and still have it actually sound good. Typically like having to omit woodwinds, and there's still things that don't translate, and we have to mix them very low, or we do leave them to the orchestrators to finesse. But for the most part, our demos are really, really specific. And I'm actually going to be sharing a couple of piano roll videos that just show some of the cues, and how I did them on sort of social media stuff. So, if anybody's interested, they'll definitely be available.
And Anthony, is there anything else you'd like to add on How to Train Your Dragon Homecoming?
Yeah, so I was really lucky to spot the film with John, and he sort of shepherded me through that process, which was, I don't think you can underestimate the value of approach. You can write great music, but it's actually how it's attached to aspects of the story that are really going to determine how impactful that music is, in the context of the story, and so that was really cool that John did that. And I think having scored solo, he did the same thing with John Williams, where John Williams came and spotted aspects of the film with him, and he called John Yoda. So I called John Stoic, as the wise sort of father of the whole process, and sort of giving me some insight into how that should be done. And director Tim Johnson, who's himself a real veteran from DreamWorks, he was actually one of the directors on Ants, which was John and Harry's very first animation movie in Hollywood. So I was very much punching above my weight in terms of the great animation minds I was working with. And so, we went through the film, and one of the things that John suggested was this idea, this memory theme, and something that could evoke, the emotional aspect of the story, which was, I think that for me as a Dragon fan, and I felt for other Dragon fans, the really enticing thing about this story was, of course, well, the Hidden World's concluded, and the dragons and Vikings are no longer together, and what does that look like for them? Surely that can't be business as usual after everything, over a really 10-year span. What has changed for them, and how are they going about life? So although it was a holiday special, we all felt that there was a mellow to really respect the Hidden World ending. There needed to be a certain amount of mellow tone to this new score, because there is this sort of feeling of nostalgia, and so John said, you should write a theme for memory, and it turned out to be really useful. I used it to link the dragons in the hidden, like Hiccup missing Toothless, wondering where he was, and then there's a cue called a very famous cue from the Dragon 1 score called Forbidden Friendship, which is a real film music favorite, and
oh yes,
it has these beautiful slate marimba and glass marimba mallet pattern. So I sort of appropriated a lot of that palette for this sequence in the Hidden World, but as an arrangement of the memory theme, which seemed like a good way to sort of move the story forward. And we'd done similar things in Dragon 2 with the Map the World theme, and done arrangements in this sort of in the style of Forbidden Friendship to support that instrumentation and palette, with those mallets and chugging cellos and a little bit of a groove, but actually, now here done with a memory theme, because as I mentioned before, to do something that had been done before wouldn't do justice to this very new situation of distance that they all find themselves in. And actually, if you want, I can just play you a little bit of.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
So, I think I sort of scratched my head for a week or so over Christmas last year, and then I came back and had a meeting back with Tim, and I went over to DreamWorks and I played him I played him pretty much what I'll play you now. If I can. But yeah, no, and I played that to Tim, and sort of, I was lucky I had some time to, to live with it as they were starting to animate, and I basically I just tried to evoke the feeling of John's tunes, looking at some of the shapes he'd been using and the harmonies, and and it turned out to be very useful. And I mean, it's really cool to see a lot of the Dragon fans sort of embracing that as part of the series. So it's really really cool to be able to do that, and also with John's blessing, because the last thing you want when you're joining, in a small way, that something as great as How to Train Your Dragon is to, give people the feeling that you're sort of trying to change everything.
I totally get your point. And by the way, that was a lovely piece you played on the piano. Very, very nice.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, obviously in the process of the score, you don't get to quite, hear it all the way down. I mean, the coda at the end is mainly saved for the end of the movie when Zephyr, the main character, well, I don't want to spoil it, but she has a change of heart, and her faith in dragons is sort of restored. So it's that became very useful for that. There was a beautiful tune that John wrote for Dragon 2 called Lost and Found, which sort of went, it was just such a beautiful piece, and so
Yes.
it's particularly to evoke that feeling. It's sweet, but it's mellow, and really, this is a very similar concept, that it's a together from afar. They're separated, but they'll always remember the friendship they had. So yeah, I mean, it was a lot of fun and a great privilege to try to evoke that spirit.
Anthony, could you perhaps already share some information on your most recent projects, such as Promising Young Woman and Hump, or is it still too soon?
Yeah, I can. I think actually, yeah, Promising Young Woman is a really very different than Dragons. Is a really fantastic, exciting movie that's going to be premiering at the Sundance Film Festival this coming January. It's written and directed by the very talented Emerald Fennell, and starring Carey Mulligan. And it's it's very hard to describe, but it's quite something. And musically, I was able to really um, do some things I'm excited about. You know, get into a slightly more old school thriller string sound. But yeah, I'm really excited to see what everybody thinks of the movie. I mean, it's one of those things where, you know, the music of How to Train Your Dragon is very much front and center in the storytelling. Obviously, it's a beautiful animation fantasy movie, but really the heart of Promising Young Woman is in Carrie's performance, and of course the incredibly witty writing and directing from Emerald. But you know, the score is able to, you know, hang out there and enhance it as well. So I'm really excited to see what people think. And Hump is a really beautiful project, written and directed by my friend Amin Matalka, who is just an incredible storyteller, and I'm really excited to see what people think of that. It's still some way off, but it's a beautiful story of friendship. It's not far from Dragon, but it's set in the Arabian desert. So I'm looking forward to, you know, leaning more into the emotional, you know, into the universal emotional bond of the friendship, but also actually dig into some more Arabian colors. So, you know, we haven't really had a movie like that in a long time. So, I mean, you know, Aladdin, obviously the recent Aladdin remake was really cool, but you know, that sort of Far East exotic world is something that hasn't been explored a lot recently. So I think it's well overdue.
Great. Looking forward. I'm looking forward to those pictures and your scores, of course, as well. And Anthony, I would like to thank you for taking so much time out of your busy schedule. I really appreciate that. And I had a great time talking to you today, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation as well.
Yeah, very much. Thank you so much. Yeah, we don't get to talk as much as we should in our cave. So it's really nice to be able to relive some of the, you know, the process of working on these projects. And thank you for being interested. So thank you for, you know, all the work you do to spread the word of what we're all working on. And you know, it's at the end of the day, it's only worth anything if people get to experience it and know about it. So you know, that's the reason we all work so hard. So thank you for taking an interest, and very much appreciated.
Of course, and thank you for working so hard on every picture and for delivering the music. And I hope you continue to do so. And I wish you just the best for every project you will tackle in the future. And thanks again for chatting with me today. And I hope you have a nice day. And I hope to talk soon and to see you soon.
Thank you so much, Michael.